Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Grant Johnson from Red News, and I'm here to talk about the news for today. For today's podcast recording, I'm going to be talking about how the EU had just decided to actually have talks with Ukraine for potential EU membership. The leaders of the different EU member states had decided to have final talks with each other to determine the future of Ukraine and the EU relationship. And after much discussions, the EU member states had voted to have official talks with Ukraine, which may allow Ukraine to become an EU member state. This is big news because Ukraine has been trying its very best to get into the European Union for several years, even before the war had started with Russia. And the EU at the time had said, no, we're not going to allow you in. But since the war in Ukraine has started, the EU has been saying, listen, we will be working on it and eventually you will be joining, but in the meantime, just continue to fight off Russia while we discuss it. Some members of the EU have been saying that Ukraine shouldn't be a part of the European Union simply because it may make Russia more furious and cause more tension between the European Union and the Russian Federation. However, the other members of the EU has been saying it is highly important that Ukraine should finally enter into the European Union and receive the benefits of being a part of the European Union. A date hasn't been given when Ukrainian officials will meet with EU officials, but due to this recent announcement by the European Union, it is likely to expect these meetings between Ukrainian officials and EU officials coming quite soon, potentially in 2024. That'll be all for today's podcast recording, but if you didn't already, follow the Red News official podcast on such platforms including Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, and other such platforms where you can listen to the Red News official podcast. You can also support the podcast on Patreon as well. For more Red News, make sure to go to the Red News official website where you can read up on news articles, and also make sure to follow Red News on different social media platforms, which the links to those are provided on the website. Thank you very much for listening to the Red News official podcast. I'm your host, Grant Johnson from Red News, and I will catch you in the next one.